This is the Money Mike Syndicated Radio Podcast. How we doing? How we doing? We're going to talk about the Raiders. My. Do we got something going on? We're going to try to get this thing and see if we can get it back on track. Las Vegas Raiders, lots of changes, lots of new coaches, but we'll talk about it and figure out what's going to be the answer here. The Raiders, man, what's going on? What's going on? The Raiders kind of hit the deck. And when I say hit the deck for Raider Nation, you know what that means. We've kind of reached down below a little bit further that we normally do, right? Because at the end of the day, the Raiders have we've been through this once, twice. I mean, you go all the way back to McKenzie. It really doesn't matter. I mean, the Raiders have been through this, right? And Mark wants to win, right? Mark's not sitting here saying, "Look, I don't want to win, and I don't want this team to be successful," right? But you also have to take in consideration the fact that wasn't expecting to go to an 0-5 or a losing game of five straight games, right? So at the end of the day, what do you got to do? You got to shake things up, all right? Antonio Pierce, as much as Mark Davis really had an admiration or admired or enjoyed the presence of Antonio Pierce, when you make a 180-degree U-turn and go in the opposite direction, things get a little tough, right? You really don't have a way to go, and you got to reach back. So at the end of the day, the NFL, same things about relationships, right? So he reaches back to Norv Turner and Joe Philbin, right? And these guys are coaches. They've coached, they've been around the game, but they're not really going to come in here and solve it. And then I had a chance, and I'll let you listen to some of it, but I had a chance to listen to Peter King, and he called it a debacle, right? So, Peter's been around the league a long time, been around the league a long time, right? So, but at the end of the day, I mean, he knows the Raiders. This is not the first time or the last time the Raiders will go through it, right? I mean, these things are going to happen, and you got to really know that at the end of the day, it has to get turned around, right? So what are they going to do? They announce on Tuesday that they're going to head and bring in and senior advisor, Norv Turner is going to kind of come and help out. And then you got his son Scott Turner is going to be the new offensive coordinator. Okay, after Luke Getzky was fired, right? Joe Philbin, right, has been named the interim offensive line coach. Now, here's the deal with Philbin: these guys are head coaches, and Philbin's been around the game. It's a philosophy for him. I mean, he could teach football, right? So Mark kind of reached back and said, "Hey, I need your help," right? So and the Raiders have a lot of relationships. So at the end of the day, I mean, the game has changed. What's new? What's different? Are the players any different? Well, you got to walk down the line and you got to say, well, the Raiders, things happen, right? I mean, you can look at Hugs, right? So you get the situation with Hugs, and I mean, it's just a bad situation. And you look at the number, just bad luck with receivers, really. I mean, you come here and you get Antonio Brown. He can't get it done for you, and he doesn't want to be a Raiders. And then you got to come back to Davante, right? And so Davante decides he doesn't want to be a Raider, right? So it's just a bad string of receivers. If all these guys, okay, understood what it meant to be a Raider, right? Not just to put it on, but being a Raider through and through. So when you don't have the Raider Nation blood and you don't understand the tradition of the Raiders, right? Because tradition of the Raiders is we fight, right? We're gonna fight. We're gonna get in here and fight this thing out. And if that's not what's in your blood, right? And so then I had this conversation, good friend of mine. I mean, a couple of them, they've been long time season ticket holders, okay, to the Raiders, right? And at the end of the day, you don't have Jacobs, right? So you got a lot of pieces that have been moved on the chessboard. We won't spend any time on Carr, but I mean, he's gone too, right? So you got a lot of pieces that Mark has moved around on the chessboard, right? And as you're doing this, you're going to have to eventually go back out there and you're going to have to find somebody. Now, I don't know which candidate that he has in mind. Okay, I really don't, but a candidate I'd put up on the board for Mark Davis and the Raiders, and I have a lot of admiration for Mark. Like I said, I've covered the Oakland Raiders, and I had an opportunity to spend a little over 4 hours with Cliff Branch, and I had an opportunity to. It was in writing an article representing to him getting in the Hall of Fame. It was the most enjoyable time I had, and he took me through the Raider history, and that I won't get into. But what it was interesting was that Mark went to Chico State, I went to Chico State, and he said that Mark Davis negotiated his contract with his father Al. That was something that I can share, but Mark's through and through gonna fight this out. Now, why do I go to Vance Joseph? Okay, here's the talk around the league. Here's the talk around the league, and again, you gotta dig down deep. That this man here, okay, is a quality head coach, understands both ends of the ball, and also has the ability, okay, to raise and coach men, right? He's been around the league, had an opportunity at a head coach, and right now, I mean, I'll tell you flat out, he's saving the Denver Broncos, right? Because without Vance Joseph, you don't have anything there. Now, there's going to be a lot of coaching candidates that are going to come to the table, right? They're going to come to the table, and you got to know these things. And here you got Peter King, right? So here's the deal I got with Peter King because at the end of the day, they're having an interview, and a lot of times you got to understand with the Raiders and Raider Nation, it's the Raiders against the NFL, so it's no loyalty when anybody speaks about the Raiders, right? You kick them when they're down. Well, they're not down, okay, and the season's not over, okay, and the Raider way is you fight your way out, okay, and you put it up in the air and you don't know what's going to happen. But I'll let you listen to this because Peter's just kind of saying, hey, look, this is a bad situation. Well, everybody knows that, right? We're not
Mess
saying
so far
anything.
this year. We were texting earlier this week about the changes that were abruptly made by first year coach Antonio Pierce, who earned the job last year with a pretty good performance as interim coach. But three members of the offensive coaching staff gone halfway through the season. Talk about trying to change a tire on a moving car. Trying to change a tire on a moving car and you don't have a spare.
Look, it's hard to hire new coaches in the middle of a season. I mean, the Raiders are a debacle. They have been for years, and now it looks like they're going to have their fifth head coach in 5 years in 2025. I have no idea how Antonio Pierce is going to make chicken salad out of the mess he has right now.
All right, so there's Peter King, and he's letting you know, and as we all know, okay, Antonio Pierce is no longer the coach of the Raiders, right? And he's calling it a debacle, okay? But at the end of the day, you know what? That's not how the game is played, and that's not how the Raiders play, right? The Raiders have been through this before. This is not new to anyone that has been with the Raiders, right? And so I'm really just pointing this out because the Raiders, I mean, Antonio did the best he could do with what he had to work with, and the guys just tuned out. I mean, for whatever reason. And here's the deal. Let me tell you how the guys tune out. This is one you hear the story, one bad apple, okay, can spoil the whole bunch, right? And when you get somebody that's not committed, right? And you get somebody that's saying, I want to be traded, right? So all of a sudden you got a leader on the team, okay, wants to be traded for whatever reason, okay, and don't get me wrong, I mean, I can tell you, I'm very well versed in Aaron Rodgers, right? Because I mean, I live here in Chico, he's from Chico, so you got to understand these things. That I know the family, and that's who he wanted to be with. I get it, right? But you come down here and you don't want to be a Raider, right? See, this is what gets me. And I respect all the guys that they brought in, right? Because when you look at the way the Raiders do it, right? You can talk about the way everybody else do it, but the Raiders do it, okay? It comes from within. It's not when you're a Raider, you're always a Raider, okay? But you don't quit, right? So none of these guys up here quit, right? None of them quit because at the end of the day, even Woodson, once a Raider, you're always a Raider. You got to come in there and fight. Now, if the guys don't want to fight, then at the end of the day, I mean, you got to look at it. Antonio Brown wasn't. I mean, he's a Pittsburgh Steeler, right? So it's kind of hard to be a Raider when you're a Steeler, right? Because I mean, history's too deep, 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 and everybody's cut. So he didn't even want the 30 million, right? So there's the bailout. Okay, you understand that he reunited. Okay, you got Jacobs goes up to Green Bay. All right, we know what happened with Carr, but we're not even spend on time. And then we're gonna go back to Mark, and I'm telling you, Mark's heart and soul is in this. This thing's gonna get rebuilt, right? It go. I mean, you keep on going all the way back to what was the story? We can't win the big one, right? We can't win the big one with John Madden, right? And then you get Flores comes in, and all of a sudden now we're winning again, right? You get the coaches, and there's been a lot of guys who have come in, right? I mean, you can go back through the list, okay, but at the end of the day, the Raider way will be found. There's no doubt about it. Mark Davis is this. You're in a rebuilding cycle where you got to get Raider blood in these players, and very well that may come as it has to come through the draft, right? Because at the end of the day, if the free agents don't want to be Raiders, then your hands are tied, right? Because everybody wants to come in and be a Raider and sign a contract, but if you don't want to play, right, you got to play. And so Mark's sitting there. What are we going to do? Right, so he reached back, and I follow this Rooney Rule very, very closely. Right, I mean, I'm really there on it, and the leader of it is the Raiders. Right, I mean, you look at African American coaches, right, and here's somebody that's in the division, and I know Mark looks at it. You got all the scouting, you got a lot of relationships with a lot of men. Here is somebody that I believe can lead the Raiders back to Raider football, right? Because he only does it one way. All right. It's not going to be out of screaming and yelling or anything like that. Okay. He just does it one way, and that's Vance Joseph. And the Denver Broncos, if you go back and look at what the Broncos been doing on offense, this man here, Vance Joseph, has been winning football games. And that is something the Raiders will appreciate because at the end of the day, there's only one way to do it, and that's to do it the Raider way. You can try it. And if you don't want to be a Raider, then we don't want you here. But to the Raider Nation, this is a part of it. You've been through it time and time again. Okay, so it's just going to be one of those seasons, but the Raiders will rise again. They will get back to Raider football, and that's how the game is played. All things are possible to those who believe. This is the Money Mike Syndicated Radio Podcast, and we'll be keeping you tuned. You got a couple old coaches coming in, Norb Turner and Joe Philbin, a couple previous head coaches that have been around the game a long time, and they've won Super Bowls, but this is the Raiders, and there's only one way to do it, the Raider way. We'll see you soon.